and and we'll just kind of jump in. So,
do you want me to record on QuickTime on my end?
Yeah, that would be amazing. That way, Google Hang or Live will be like our safety, and then hopefully we'll get some clean audio for. Although you're gonna make my audio sound like absolute poop, so yeah.
Yes, I am. Man, when I recorded with that USB mic, or when I have a Snowball as well.
Yeah.
That was the first one I ever bought. I would fill my office with pillows, blankets. Mm-hmm. My wife even made for me felt foam sound absorbing boards.
Yeah.
Filled it. The echo was just crazy. But once you kind of address that as much as you can, it's a little better.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it might be cheaper to end up just going with that route.
Absolutely.
All right, sweet. Okay, so everybody, this is the Catholic Creatives Podcast, where we interview freaking cool, awesome creatives who are doing interesting things out in the world. And we have Michael Gromley from Catching Foxes and Lay Evangelist here today. Michael, thank you so much for being on the show.
You are very much welcome. Very much welcome.
And where are you sitting right now?
I'm sitting. I'm sitting in my office right now. I have all the lights off and my door shut in my office at work at my parish. So no one. If the lights are off and the door shut, people don't even look in the window. My Virtu Safe Environment full length window. They just walk right on by. So this is how I roll.
That's hilarious. If someone actually does look in and see.
Well, they can barely. They'll just see my eyes because I brought from home my 27-inch iMac sitting on my desk in between me and the door. So that's all they'll see.
Good. Well, cool. It's a good place to be, man. So you were just saying your friends call you what?
My friends call me Gomer. Gomer. Gomer.
Gomer. Okay. Sergeant Gomer.
No, that would make sense. Actually, I'm nicknamed after the prostitute wife of the prophet Hosea.
Huh.
Yeah, I have friends in high school. I started homeschooling in 10th grade. I went to a Catholic school, in public school all my life, but I went to a Catholic high school, and then I left, and my buddies called me Gormley, which is my last name, and then this guy who talks like a stoner, but he wasn't, he took an Old Testament class, and one day they called me on a payphone. Remember those? They called me on a payphone at noon, and they woke me up because I was homeschooled, which meant I just slept all day. And he said, and he decided to call me Gomer, and the whole Gomer thing stuck, and it was because he came out of an Old Testament class, and they had just studied the prophet Hosea, and how God commanded the prophet Hosea to marry a prostitute named Gomer, and so that's where my nickname comes from. It's a great cocktail party story.
Yeah, I mean, cool. So, in what way are you like a prostitute married to Hosea? Just like that you're ditching them for a different school?
No, literally it was just the similarity and sounding of my last name. But I always told my parents hate my nickname. They hate my mom. My name is Michael. Oh my God, did I name you Gomer? She would say that to me all the time. She's from inner city Philadelphia, and I do not do her accent justice. But they hate Gomer so much. But that's like my youth ministry handle now. That's what everyone knows me as. So I just go by Gomer all the time. And it's funny because when I was in the youth ministry world, people, now that I do adult faith formation full time, people are like, "Are you still going by Gomer?" And I'm like, "It's like Cher or Madonna. It's a one name thing that people know me by." So yeah.
Yeah. So what got you into doing this whole kind of evangelization thing? I mean, did you grow up just being super passionate about your faith and wanting to convert all of the little pagans that were running around, or what was that process like for you?
Yeah, I wasn't surrounded by pagans. I was surrounded by fundamentalist anti-Catholic bigots in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Not everyone was, but I had people don't realize if you're Catholic but you don't live in a Catholic saturated area, that's one thing. But to live in an area that is saturated by fundamentalists, it's a totally different story. And so we have Oral Roberts University and big Baptist colleges and Rhema Bible College and all this stuff. So I would, even teachers at my public school would like malign our Catholic faith, and there'd be sermon series and all these different churches, why Catholicism is a cult and stuff. So my love of evangelization didn't really happen until later in life. It was really my love for out-arguing the people around me who were calling me a Mary worshiper and a cookie worshiper and all that stuff. So I got super into arguing and debating people based on Scripture. So that's where I ended up falling in love with Scripture, trying to out-Scripture Protestants attacking me. So that's where a lot of that comes from.
And so that's why you went to Steubenville to learn how to out-argue Protestants?
No, I went to Steubenville because I was terrified of becoming a priest, but I thought I should. I always thought I was going to be a priest my whole life. My mom one time told me that I had priest hands. I've never heard that before, but I have priest hands. Father Michael Schmitz was like, "What the heck does that mean, priest hands? Do all priests have one pair of hands?" And I said, "Well, Father, it probably means that I don't do honest work. I've never done honest work in my life." And he's like, "Shut up." But the notion was basically I went to Franciscan because I just wanted to go to a college for 1 year, maybe even just one semester, without the pressure of having to decide whether I was going to become a priest or not. And I've always wanted to go to Franciscan. I was a Scott Hahn junkie and Regis Martin on EWTN, Franciscan Presents on EWTN. I've seen almost every single episode when I was in high school. I was just entirely self-motivated fanatic for that stuff. So going to Franciscan was kind of a dream of mine, but I always thought I'd be there for a semester or a year and then go off to seminary. Ooh, didn't happen.
And so why'd you stay?
The ladies. I mean, to be honest with you, the biggest problem in my life with my struggle with my faith at that time was I was battling a ever-present but at varying degrees of intensity pornography, addiction, habit, whatever, alongside a love of my faith. So there was this total split in my life between the public life of someone who loves Christ and wants to follow Christ and honestly does, and this darker side of my life where I'm broken, I am consumed by pornography, all of this stuff. And I honestly, one of my reasons for going to Franciscan was I was scared of the seminary because I wasn't the image that I was projecting. I knew I wasn't this perfect Catholic kid. But I still projected that image, and I was afraid to be honest with my friends, and I was afraid to overcome like what life would look like without pornography in my life. I was just a ball of fear. And so going to Franciscan enabled me to see people who were just as broken as I was, but finding healing and actually fighting their sin, not just being like, "Oh, I'll never win, I give up." But people who strove against it and struggled and all that stuff. But it also showed me a whole bunch of incredibly beautiful women who were virtuous and loved Jesus and wanted to be nursing majors and teachers and youth ministers, not, the wide variety of stuff. And up until that time, I mean, I had a lot of good friends who were very good Catholics, and many of them actually went to Franciscan with me. But it just was this thing of like, it was like a culture that I just wanted to be saturated in. And then I read Theology of the Body, and I realized that marriage was not a second-class sacrament in the church, that it was a beautiful expression of divine love. No priest ever said that to me. No priest ever said, "Michael, you know that we give marriage as a sacrament just for those chumps who can't cut it in the priesthood or religious life." But I literally always felt that. So one of the consequences of other people telling you you're going to be a priest. Your whole life.
I can't tell you how many times I've been to a daily mass and had the old blue-haired lady kind of, come over to me while I'm, got my eyes closed and praying. They like tap me on the shoulder. I'm like, like, "You're called to be, I think, a priest. You should think about that." I'm like, I don't know why they always, are like old New Yorkers. That's kind of how the voice sounds in my head. Right. You're called to be a priest. And I'm like, that's scary.
You're called to be less nosy. Why don't you go pray for your soul?
Yeah, well, I think also there's just this like funny thing about like, oh, if you're a young guy that really cares about the faith, you really should think about the priesthood. You know, it's like, because there's no one else, like, no, if you don't care about like your faith, then you're called to be married, and that's how you'll do it. Like, and it's like really kind of funny. I never really saw it called.
Yeah, by funny you mean absolutely terrifying. It is so it's so sad that's the, oh, well, look, he goes to daily mass. He obviously should be a priest. You know what's great? You know a good way to avoid that? Stop going to daily mass. You just stop going.
Yeah.
Take that.
Yeah.
Take that, blue-haired lady. I'm not going to go to daily mass anymore. Take that.
Yeah, man. But no, so one of the things that I've really appreciated about your perspective in the way that you approach doing your evangelical kind of stuff has been that it hasn't been really argumentative and polemic. Like, grew up in a culture where being Catholic was in a way being pretty like Republican and pretty like conservative, and just there was, you vote along the party lines, and Catholicism is like a part of that. And it was political, right? Like I grew up in the Bible Belt too, so there's this tribal like, they're always kind of stealing our ground, you know, we're behind enemy lines. And so a lot of my faith was developed around just like learning how to argue with people. But that was very, that level of faith was one that broke, that couldn't sustain like the real human experience, the real difficulty and mystery of life that came when I grew up. So like, how did you go from just being, you know, a Steubenville grad that was kind of struggling with like this duality to like reconciling that and then turning it into, you know, a ministry that you brought out with you into, I guess, into your profession and career?
I was sitting down with a priest one time, and he said to me, he told me the story of St. Francis, and he talked about the story of Francis meeting a leper and how he was so terrified of lepers, he always ran away from them. But at this time, because of his conversion, he ended up embracing, kissing the leper, and then giving him the leper his clothes and exchanging with the leper the clothes. And the priest said to me, the heroic image of the rich young Francis is who you want to be, the virtuous you, the good you, the saintly or heroic you. But the pornography version of you is the leper you. And he said, the way you keep living your life as if the way to go about it is to pretend always to be the rich princely guy and to ignore this leper part of you. He said, but the real way is by reconciling the two, by having the rich man embrace the leper, and by doing that, by the embrace, the humility of the leper becomes the garment of the virtue of the rich man. And that shocked me to my core, because I realized that is exactly what I had been doing. I had been running from humility, and I've been running from a lot of just looking into my life and seeing it for what it was, seeing the sin for what it was, instead of just doing the cycle of, you know, discouragement, depression, sin, you know, over and over again, and then pretending like that part didn't exist about me. And once you understand that you are a sinner, you understand what mercy is. You understand what grace is. You understand how there but for the grace of God go I. So who the hell am I to walk by with my nose held up so high at all these other quote-unquote sinners? And I began to develop an allergy for polite company among Christian circles. I very much, I mean, you know, I'm just like anyone else who is a believer for a long time. You have friends who are believers, and all your atheist friends tend to go away. You might keep in contact with them, but they tend to fade away. But after a while, that notion of being a Christian, but only when I'm with other Christians, you know, we think that we're living our faith, quote unquote, out in the world, but we're not. We just made the bubble go from the church to our house, you know? And so a lot of that you know, we formed these Christian enclaves in so many different ways. It's one of the reasons why our show, Catching Foxes, does not have, while it's a scriptural text, it doesn't have the word Catholic in it. Because for us, we weren't trying to cater specifically to a Catholic audience. We were two friends who were Catholic trying to have a conversation about things that matter. And so obviously, Catholic Creatives is trying to focus on the Catholic community and stirring up, the quest for creativity, truth, beauty, and goodness, and all that good stuff within the Catholic kind of ethos. Well, we're not. We're trying to just that's why we cuss. That's why we allow our podcast is explicit and stuff, is because we don't want false notions of Christianity, the Disneyification of Christianity, pushing people away who might agree with us, who might disagree, but enjoy the conversation or whatever. So it really was this allergy that I began to develop that, number one, arguing people, you can't argue people into the kingdom of God. What oftentimes you find that people who are argued to with constantly, they actually have a relationship with the one who's consistently meeting with them and arguing with them, so I used to meet with a young man who struggled with moral relativism, meeting with them, and I would try to out-argue him every single time, of course, because moral relativism is insanity. But at the same time, I was investing in that kid, and he realized it, So those are the things that I think really need to wake people up. The new evangelization, I mean, it's not a book. It's not a DVD with a 12-part series of the blah, blah, blah. The new evangelization is human beings connecting to other human beings. That literally, just start having stuff at your house. That's what I tell people all the time. Literally, my next bulletin entry is a desperate plea for community to my parish. Just start meeting at your house. And then once you have these conversations, all of a sudden, oh, would you look at that? Jesus is here. I talk a lot.
Sorry, no, my Google Hang just kind of cut out for a second, so I didn't hear the last thing that you said, but
it was pure gold. It was pure gold.
It was pure gold. I mean, it had something to do with the new evangelization. Anyway, yeah. I'm gonna kind of hop back into it. But so one of the things that I'm hearing here is that as you were dealing with kind of the duality within you of the leper and the prince, trying to get them to embrace. Once that experience clicked for you, and they were embraced, felt like you could see everyone else just kind of projecting the prince of their own prince and not really dealing with the leper, and then therefore not really connecting deeply with each other. Is that sort of what you were experiencing and seeing there?
In my community of the Woodlands, Texas, it is a very beautiful area, master planned community from the 1970s. Every aspect of it is just brilliant. But middle income to higher income to ultra wealthy all live in this area. And you can absolutely create an environment of being fake, presenting the rich man, right? Presenting the guy or woman who has it all together. And the great failing with that is we're not communicating the truth about ourselves to anyone else. When we don't communicate the truth about ourselves, that means we're lying about our lives. And so I reached a point in my life where if I started admitting certain things about my struggles, like my struggles being a dad, but I don't make it about the struggles, right? It's not a self-pity session. It's not me whining. Oh my gosh, my kids are well, I do whine, but because my kids are nuts. But it has to be about, it's the way that we share our brokenness in the sense of disarming people around us, right? And so I was introduced to this when I was at Franciscan. I was in this thing called a household. My house was called AMDG, Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam, and part of a big theme in our household was a lyric from our household theme song, which is, Father, you are found in the broken, so as broken we come, right? So the notion is, I'm not here to hide my brokenness from anyone. I'm here to actually not just put it on display, but to give it to you and to let you give your brokenness to me and not hate you, shame you, despise you, or push you away. And I realize that a lot of people, especially in the church, the reason why we become disenfranchised, especially young people become disenfranchised with the church, is they feel like there's so much externality to it that it's not reaching the inner core of who they are. And so you can pretend to be a Christian on the outside, but does it really change your life on the inside? And once people see changed lives, then I think they'll come around and be like, so this is the power of the gospel. But right now, they're not seeing changed lives, they're seeing fake lives, and they're saying, So this is the power of groupthink, and this is the power of robotic, sheeple and all that stuff. So that's been a big area of concern for me.
Yeah. And so when you left Steubenville and kind of ventured out into the crazy wild of youth ministry, what was it like trying to put that into practice in parishes? Did you feel like that was really received well, that you were around people who understood that dynamic, or was that something that was isolating for you?
The people who are on the outside looking in, the once a month or to once a year mass goers, to them it is like a life preserver, right? To the people who have a quote unquote strong Catholic identity, right? People who are practicing Catholics and all that stuff that they kind of embody with that, those people are the ones who knock on my door and be like, I really don't think you need to be up there saying that. And I was like, well, I'm not saying it to you. I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about the people who feel like you are so fake that it's pushing them away. Not that. And well, see, here's the deal. It's not that they're fake. And I kind of want to draw this line. It's not that they're fake. People are deliberately being fake or whatever. It's that when we project an image of perfection, people who are knowingly imperfect, right, where that's kind of at the forefront of their consciousness, people who are knowingly imperfect, what they end up doing is feeling like they can't belong. So for instance, here's a stupid way that I do it. When I go up, I'm the coordinator of adult faith formation. I partner with people at different areas in our parish who have adults in some way, shape, or form with the program. So at the beginning of the SAC prep classes, we bring all the parents. We have 5 meetings. And I join up. What is it? 5 meetings? Yeah, we have a bunch of meetings, and I join up with the people that run it, and they give me 15 minutes, and they do this for me. And and we meet in the church, and I talk about how I'm the father who is barely hanging on during Mass because his kids are going insane. Right, I'm the dad who I will pump my kids full of every Cheerio and Fruit Loop, even though they're gluten-free. I will pump them full of every little thing that I can possibly give them to keep them quiet enough for you to be able to pray, because I don't know how to be a good dad and raise perfect kids who are perfectly quiet and well-behaved at Mass. I was like, I have monsters and I'm barely hanging on. And you can visibly see these parents' shoulders just lower from being uptight, guarded, to just being like, oh my God, and just a simple, right? That's so simple and so silly. It's silly, but at the same time, these parents are like, that's why I don't go to church anymore, because my kid was nuts, and I felt like I was ruining all the perfect people's, attendance at Mass, or someone gave me a dirty. My kid just started crying, and I didn't have time to make it to the, out of the pew, and blah blah blah. And we just do we do all of this stuff where people will say things like, "Oh, I'm not perfect," but then when it comes to actually admitting their imperfections in a way that's healthy, they don't, and they kind of shame people that do. So I just realized a long time ago that more people than not are struggling with probably the same sin. So if you announce that you're struggling with it, they'll come and find you and want to know more.
Man, so that's so beautiful, and I love that. I love that cry of the authentic, of the inner life kind of being put out, so that everyone else can have the freedom to be themselves as well. I think that's so central to the call of the evangelist in a way. What was it like trying to have that kind of conversation within the church? So was it was it something that slowly changed the dynamic of the people around you, or do you feel like the church itself and its kind of culture was not able to, handle that kind of interior work?
I always, as much as people who are in the evangelization kind of charism, who tend to be more movement, more spirit-led than institution, as much as we dog institution, I have to say, even the practice of confession where you treat it like a car wash instead of this thing that is a dramatic encounter between you and the foot of the cross.
Right.
Even that causes people to admit their faults to another human being. If you do that with any sort of frequency, having other people, and how I kind of want to, I don't want to paint a picture that all I do is walk around being like, hey, guess how much I sinned yesterday, But this notion of vulnerability and honesty comes at this notion of I'm trying to build the part of the common good that's severely wounded, which comes from a fake piousness and all this stuff. But when you have a culture that does go to understands it, there is you have a behind enemy lines kind of ally that people have. They want this. They know that confession is good for the soul. They know this stuff, and so it's not. I don't get a lot of pushback. I don't get any pushback from the staff or anything like that. In fact, I'm able to build conversations with them. But the bigger thing that people push back for, systematically, overwhelmingly, surprisingly, shockingly, is the revulsion that good Catholics have for evangelization in the parish. Utterly, there are so many antibodies in a parish against evangelization that it is shocking to me.
I have so one story that I have to that, as I was getting to the end of my experience of doing youth ministry, and moving into media, I was presenting my parish with you guys should really consider doing communications. I'm in one of the most wealthy, fastest growing parishes in not just the diocese, but in the US, right? Like the entire US, like huge church, mega church. And they have zero effort into communication, which is something that I think is pretty deeply part of what it takes to evangelize someone. You can't evangelize someone without talking to them, right? So if our job as a parish is to be bringing people in, we need to invest in media and communication. So I was just kind of giving all this out. And I thought at least if I founded the argument on we commonly understand that our job is to be evangelists, then maybe I could build up from there, right? Hugely mistaken. Not. After I gave this presentation saying if we just I'm trying to deal with the money aspect of it, right? I'm thinking they're going to push back because we don't have enough money. And I was so wrong about that. They had money and they actually were willing to use it. They were so I was saying look, if we just get 600 more people out of this, if we just get 50 more people out of this, our monthly donations are going to go up by 600%. We're going to get so much more money back from this. And they were wait, the priest, I'm not even saying a council member said this, the pastoral associate, young guy, says the problem is we don't really have enough room in the church for more people. I don't even know why we're talking about this. We don't have any more room. So we just need to think about getting a new building first. And I was like, what? I just was slayed by that. I couldn't even think. It was incredible. So
I know that image right there is precisely what is ruining the Catholic Church in terms of evangelization, because number one, we don't know how to evangelize. We don't even know what it is, even though the documents are all there and anyone can just Google it, go to the Vatican.va, click English, and then just Google it or just scroll through the website. You can find all this wonderful stuff. But over and over again, the response is, well, what are we going to do with the people? Or, well, what kind of people? Or, how can we or one of my favorites was the demographics of a neighborhood had shifted. So most of the white people kind of moved out. Most of, various shades of brown moved in. And they were like, well, and I said, what kind of efforts are you doing in the community to evangelize? And they're like, well, we don't really have a presence with them. And I was like, oh, you said them. You literally said them. they don't even understand like this notion of like finding someone who doesn't belong and bringing them in. They don't understand that. It's shocking, and it can manifest itself in ways of about facilities. One time along your story, I had a priest say, "Oh, look at this church. It's filled from left to right, from top to bottom. You know, only about 20%, according to our statistics, only about 20% of those registered actually come to Mass." And I'm almost thinking, God, because where would we put that other 80%? And I was like, if the other 80%, if the other 80% actually came, you want a space problem in those cases. But then they would have enough money that you would be able to do other things like, I don't know, build another church, build a chapel on the other side of town and serve it that way. Or no, but we're bound. We are so bound in the church by the parish boundary. The parish boundary binds our thinking. We just like, well, then we're just gonna have to open a new parish, but there aren't enough priests. So sorry, souls, enjoy hell. You know?
Yeah.
Such inadequate thinking. It's dangerous. It's so deadly.
It is dangerous. But like, so I think one of the interesting things too that we've even discovered through the group has been that like I have made so many like connections with people who have gone from doing parish ministry to working in media as designers or agency owners or doing film and video. It's a recurring theme over and over and over again. Youth ministry into communications. And I kind of wanted to touch on that, and that, like, what do you think is the connection between doing youth ministry and evangelization and then going into some of these creative fields? Like, why do you think that's a pattern? And what is it about like that creative kind of like experience of doing ministry that launches people into that?
I would say first and foremost, the experience of good art as young people, or not even just good art, but there's so much branding and marketing and stuff that's out there that's just of a higher quality, that young people were raised in the church by clip art, and then they walk out the door and see all their favorite bands and products and whatever, with just a real high quality of message, appeal, beauty, aesthetic, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. That then when they look at the church bulletin, they're like, are you kidding me? This is a train wreck. And then they look at the evangelical churches and they're like, wow, they have like 5 full-time graphic designers on staff and all of this stuff. And it's not just slickness, which is so annoying. Steve Jobs one time talked about, people keep thinking design is the thing you add to a thing, right? You have the engineering, and then at the end you add design. He said, no, the design of a thing is the thing. Whether you're talking about software design or you're talking about hardware design. And so many people think that that a lot of the stuff within communications is just superfluousness. Like, it's just this added on fluff to make it shinier and digestible to the masses. When in reality, people who have, especially in youth ministry, when you've had to win over a high school student on a confirmation retreat after you just stole his weekend away and he doesn't even care about being confirmed and all he does is hate you, and you walk into that and by the end of the retreat he loves Christ or is moving in that direction, you have to know your audience. You have to pull out every accommodating grace you possibly can. You have to journey with these people and all of the cliches, right? Like, come as you are and all these wonderful things. You have all these mentalities as a youth minister. And then you go back to your office job and you're the only one who maybe the youth minister is the only one that owns an Apple product, right? An Apple computer. And so they're like, will you design something for us? And then all of a sudden you got the job creep where the youth minister takes care of the social media stuff. And it's like, you know what? How about instead of the clip art of the dove that looks like it's pooping balls of fire onto the 12 apostles, why don't we just get, and then they'll do some beautiful little tweak with, some sacred art with some kind of modern custom filter or something. And all of a sudden these things become, and then the pastors make it their job. Like right now, I help manage our parish our parish Facebook page. I help update about 30 different people's ministries' website, even though it's not under me. I create graphics. I'm not a graphic designer at all. I'm not an artist in that regard. I help design all this stuff, and I just do all this stuff because no one else will, and no one else cares, and then it's clip art city if you don't step up. So if you don't know how to communicate to your audience in a way that respects your audience, because youth ministry is not insulated. right? A classroom is less insulated, but it can be insulated between student and teacher when the curriculum is put between the two. But at least in principle, in youth ministry, the relationship precedes curriculum. I always tell this to people, they say, what's the difference between a teacher and a youth minister, or a teacher, even when they're both, teaching the same subject and stuff? I said, a good teacher is one who, or the difference between it is the curriculum. What comes first, the curriculum or the relationship? An excellent teacher is one who prizes both the curriculum and the relationship. But a youth minister, it primarily is interested in fostering a deeper relationship and connecting that relationship ultimately to Christ. And when you have people who, like, let's say clergy, who go up, they give homilies, and then they get off the pulpit, who tells them, unless it's like a political homily or a moral homily, who tells them that they're wrong or that it was bad? Hey, great homily, Father, handshake. I'm going to go get my coffee and donuts now. Right? Where's the feedback for that? Now, a youth minister, if kids won't show up, kids don't care, and you're trying to get people who don't care to care. So I think the biggest problem, or one of the biggest reasons why they go into communications, is because they fight for their audience's attention. Whereas other people, they could care less.
Yeah. Can I riff on that for a second, just to get something off my own chest? Like,
please do.
If I go to like one more mass where the homily is a priest that barely speaks English reading off a piece of paper for 45 minutes, like, I seriously am going to go up to that priest afterwards. You can hold me to this, and actually ask him like why he did that. And I take that seriously, because like, I think that we as a community are so okay with mediocrity in the sacraments, because the sacraments are awesome. But we're just so content with just kind of complaining about them and not giving the feedback that's necessary, that like nothing is changing. And like, I also want to advocate, like, if a priest isn't calling me and winning my attention, like, I am going to sit on my phone the whole time, and I'm not going to feel sorry for it, like I'm doing a bad thing, because like, I know that priests deserve respect, but like, we as lay people deserve respect. And like, if you are not learning to do that job, to take my attention, like, I'm not going to give it to you because you got a collar on. And I think that like, just say, I don't know, like, this is coming out of a place of like deep kind of frustration of just like over and over and over and over, just having to sit through a homily that is just like teeth gnashingly horrible. And it like after spending tons of time putting together a presentation, for like youth, where I'm like working so hard to think through it and to be like, it just makes me feel like, wow. So I think we have, I don't know. I feel like we have to do something to like let priests know that they need to step up.
If they are reading from a piece of paper, whether they have broken English or not, whether they, spend so much time that you walk up to the stack of paper, you take the last page and you hand it to him and you say, "This is all you need, bro." And you just take the rest and you put it in the trash. Because basically the last page is the summary of everything and the concluding part. And it's just like, oh, look, your summary is the thing. A page, if you don't know this, probably about a double-spaced Times New Roman 12-point font, or Calibri 11-point font, kind of the Microsoft Word standard. If you were to put that in double space, one page is probably about 5 to 6, maybe 7 minutes of a presentation, right? Mm-hmm. If you're just straight reading, it'll probably take you about 5 minutes to read through it in some sort of, presentation way, right? Meaning you're reading out loud. Now, if someone has 3, 4, 5 pieces of paper, which I have seen plenty of times, this is just a disaster. Now, some people need, especially if they're ESL, they need that piece of paper, but it's like just one piece of paper, maybe two, if that second page is half and then you have doodles on the bottom, right? Don't do that. And I think clergy, we are terrified of being honest with our clergy, And so what do our clergy suffer from? I mean, we demand absurd things from our priests, right? I led a prayer thing for our priests one time. We demand the absolute height of absurdity. We demand them to be CEOs. We demand them to be perfect presenters. We demand them to be, perfect one-on-one counselors. We want everything from our priests, who are high school kids that entered seminary, some of them because they were afraid of their sexuality, some of them because they ardently loved Jesus Christ and felt a call to this, some of them just because this is a wonderful career path, a wonderful way of life. They're not in love with the priesthood. Not everyone is. I met many priests who are like, man, it was just, my family had 8 kids. I decided that I was going to be the priest of the family. You're like, you mean you love Jesus so much? He's like, well, I mean, I guess I do now, but at the time, and I was like, I don't understand this. This was not my understanding of vocations. But for these priests, we demand so much. So I would just say, there's a lot of advice you can give to priests who, if I were to say I'm an artist, it tends more towards how I speak and what I try to do when I give my presentations, way more so than what I do on my podcast. But I would just say, if you don't know the temperature of the audience, you have to know the content so well that you can give it so simply. Simplification is a demanding task. To take anyone can give a 15-minute talk. To give a 5-minute talk and deliver the right content in those 5 minutes is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult. Anyone can give an hour-long talk. You can just go on and on and on, like most homilies do that go for 30, 45 minutes. But if you were to narrow that down, and pick the 1 point or the 2 points or the 3 points, whatever, you could you could impact people's lives, but they don't do that. They don't do that. Instead, what they do is they paraphrase the gospel with pleasant sounding tripe attached to it, and you don't know why you came. You don't know why.
Yeah. Well, I think also one thing that I'm thinking about when I listen to you saying the simplification point, every time that I've been to a mass for VBS or a mass where the specific audience is children, like even priests that I know always give bad homilies, give awesome homilies. Like they actually just like, one, I feel like they're not as intimidated, but they just like, they focus on like love and really simple stories that kids can understand. And somehow I think they think that once kids grow up, they don't need that stuff anymore. And it can't be further from the truth, like the way that you present, if you can win children's attention, the same principles should apply with adults. Like what you learn in speaking to those kids is the same kind of thing that you should apply to speaking to those who are no longer children. And yeah,
one of the big differences. Sorry, my bad. There's like this slight Google Hangout delay, and I'm like, I don't want to interrupt him. There's an interesting thing between the VBS and the regular Mass, which is who is your audience at a regular Mass, right? Who are you preaching to? Are you preaching to the guy who gets it and runs up to you afterwards and says, I could have had a little bit more meat on there? Do you run to is it the person who's like, I had no idea what you were talking about. You were way over my head today. Who's Aquinas, right? And you have all of these, you have everyone in between. You have people who are skeptics and they have an axe to grind. You have people who are outside the church morally but are coming because they just want the sentimental attachment to the faith. You have other people who are looking for a reason to repent and change their life. And so one of the big things that we need to do is I think we need to form very concretely who in our mind are we speaking to in the homily. And I think that is the number one thing we do not teach our clergy when they're up there on the pulpit. Instead, it's, they give them tips on how to form a talk, like a lot of them, what are your 3 points, your intro, your conclusion, and then wrap it up. But that's not how you preach a homily. You preach a homily for the conversion and the edification of people, right? Conversion, you preach the basic gospel. Edification, you give them the catechesis that they need to grow in their faith. So sometimes you need to focus on pure conversion and trying to seek out repentance from people. Other times, it needs to be edification. You need to take the gospel, the lectionary, and you need to just edify souls with it. You need to give people both of that stuff. But what you find often is because we don't know who we're talking to, we actually end up talking to no
one. Yeah. And then it's more of just like an act of respect and discipline for the congregation to like, be listening. And that's always crazy. I think it's just like a really good litmus test. If you see the kids like being rowdy, if you see kids fidgeting and like moving around and just being in general like bad, like you're not being compelling. Like all of the brains of the adults are doing the same thing. It's just the kids are being honest,
The adults have more self-control.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what they all want to do. And you're kidding yourself if you think that you've like delivered something awesome if like the kids aren't paying attention. I do the same thing as a music minister.
Go on.
Yeah, sorry, man. This like delay thing is kind of funny. It's messing with it. But anyway, I was just saying I do the same thing as a music minister where like if kids are like singing and being really like into it, or if they're like jumping around, I know that like this music is actually like causing a response within the congregation as a whole. And if they're like, yeah, same thing. If they're being bored, then I need to work on my song selection. Like I probably got too indie.
That's funny. I was just going to say earlier, about the fidgeting kids and the restrained adults. Two things. Number one, having kids in mass is awesome because you can be like, oh, I got to take my kid outside. I've only done it once, but I literally left the church and took my kid outside because I looked at my daughter and I go, do you need to go to the bathroom? She's like, eh. And I was like, we're going. Because it was so terrible. It was so terrible. And we were around a minute 32 and I was like, Daddy needs to stretch his legs. We gotta get out of here. The other thing is kind of like with this connecting, we don't really know not just who we're preaching to, but we often don't know why we don't know why. I mean, why does the homily explain the scriptures to the faithful that is heard in mass? But part of this ongoing thing, I love Spurgeon, famous Protestant theologian, Charles Spurgeon. He talks about, he was given advice to a young preacher. And the preacher said, he asked him, when do you preach? You preach Christ at every sermon. He's like, well, isn't our job to preach whatever the text demands? And he looked at him and he's like, all of Scripture speaks of Christ. And he said, you know how every road leads to London here in England? And he's like, and he goes, Jesus. Find a way and take them to Jesus. Walk through hedges and plow through fields if you have to. Take them to Jesus. And that's huge because someone gave me, actually you interviewed him, Ennie Hickman of Adore Ministries. It's one of your earlier podcasts. He gave me, he said, we're going to do a series on the minor prophets and I want you to do a minor prophet. And I was like, sweet. Obviously, he's going to pick the prophet Hosea because my nickname is Gomer. And that's easy out of the park. I've done talks on him the whole situation all the time. And no, he chose that one for himself. I got Nahum. Have you ever read the minor prophet Nahum?
Nope.
Okay. You can take about 7 book of the Bible, more depressing than Job, because it's this guy for 3 or 4 chapters just literally saying, heck yeah, Nineveh's going to be destroyed by God. Take that. Can't wait to see all the dead bodies. Can't wait to see your children killed. Can't wait to see all this stuff. The end. And I had to give a presentation to high school students on Nahum. And it was funny because I was like, Spurgeon. Well, Spurgeon, there is nothing but hedges and trees and forests in between. And so I began praying. There's a couple verses in there, like blessed are the feet of those who bring good news, which is a thing quoted by Paul. It's in Nahum and I think in Habakkuk, which is about bringing the gospel, the good news, the good tidings. This different stuff. And once you realize that Jesus Christ is the victor, right? This notion of Jesus didn't just die for your and my penal sin, but he also made war against sin, death, and the devil. that Christ is coming as victor. So then I looked at it from that perspective, and Nineveh was like Pharaoh is like the devil, right? They are types of the Antichrist or Satan. And so all the power and glory of the city is the passing glory of satanic temptation and satanic power. And it said that the Lord will pursue the people of Nineveh with a flood of death. And I said, with a flood. And I use that image as Christ pursuing them, not with armies, not with killing, not with murder, and not with a flood like he did with Noah at the time of Noah. He pursued them with the flood of the water and the blood that poured forth from his heart, right? The blood from his wounds. And I connected it to Christ crucified is how we make war against sin, death, and darkness. Preaching Christ, if you look at him through this lens, and I connected him to Jonah and all this stuff, but always you take these texts, and you let them be crazy. Nahum is crazy. Jonah, if you actually read Jonah, it is a crazy book. The whale, blah, blah, blah. It's an insane book filled with nationalism and racism. Like, Jonah would then preach repentance to the Ninevites. He would rather die. So God says, go to Nineveh. And he goes the exact opposite direction. Goes to the Mediterranean, hops on a boat. The boat comes. He's not going to murder himself. He's not going to kill himself. So he says, hey, you guys, I'm the fault. I'm the one that the gods are pushing or whatever. Throw me overboard. And then God coughs him up on the shores of Nineveh. Right? So he literally gets to Nineveh. He walks in the middle of the city and goes, the repenter in 40 days is all going to be destroyed. And then everyone repents. And he's like, I knew it, God. I knew you would do this. This is ridiculous. And God, and essentially the last words of it are, there are 125,000 souls in that city. Shouldn't I be concerned about them? And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, God actually cares about people outside the tribe of the Judahites or the nation of Israel and all this stuff in a very... When I said that to the kids, all of a sudden it's like, oh, contemporary things, racism, nationalism, us versus them-ism, the call of the gospel, preaching salvation, my personal sin and darkness in general. You can do this, people. You can actually do this. Preaching, why are we preaching? We're preaching Jesus Christ to the people. Man, I have talked for a long time. How are you doing?
No, dude, I'm loving it. I'm riffing with it. It's so true. And I think that, like, just to jump off on that last point, and that all communication, in a way, all good art is of that same road. Like the perspective that even all of Scripture, even if it doesn't immediately literally speak about Jesus, is pointing towards him in its deeper essence. And the same is true about the entire world. Like, the world that is breathed by God and created by the Word, by the Logos, is shot through with him and with his presence. And so, like, outside of Scripture, even, the art that we make and the things that we speak about are also speaking about Jesus. And I think it's the job of the artist and of the evangelist. It's the same job. And I think this is actually why so many youth ministers end up doing, like, communications and art, is that, like, connecting something that is human to something that is abstract is like the work of a creative. It's a creative task that can't be done by a robot or by, like, math. It's hard to do, but incarnating a spiritual truth in a, like, deeply personal and vulnerable and emotional way is what it takes to do good evangelization. And I don't know, I think it's like what God was doing by sending himself as Jesus, and why everything points towards him. So I think in kind of closing in the conversation, just that, like, even though we're talking about homilies and talking about, like, how much we want the church to communicate better, even in that level, and got on that, like, kind of riff, we're still talking about Jesus in a way, even there, because we're talking about, like, something that is so deeply part of, like, God, which is, like, how he wants to communicate with us by, like, coming down to our level and being with us spiritually. So anyway, yeah, I'm just kind of riffing myself, but I think it's a really beautiful thing. Beautiful insight.
When I do RCIA, one of the one of my favorite things is as we get closer to kind of breaking open the sacraments after we go through, who is God and what is the church, we dive into this notion of the sacramentality of the church. And instead of taking them into, through Aquinas and stuff like that at first, what we spend time doing is going through Gerard Manley Hopkins and his poetry.
There we go.
Yeah, and you said the phrase "shot through," and I was like, "Shot through." The world is shot through with the glory, grandeur of God. And so I have them read Pied Beauty, That Nature is the Heraclitean Fire, and On the Comfort of the Resurrection, which is my favorite.
Oh, really?
Favorite
You've given that, man. That is hilarious. How did that go?
Oh man, awful! It goes awful. What do you think? How else is it gonna go? But I sit there with my class of, I'll have 15 people, and I will slowly read That Nature is a Heraclitean Fire and On the Comfort of the Resurrection, which is the best title ever. And I'll slowly read it, and they will just be like, "What is happening?" And then I'll go back through it and pull out certain parts of it. I'm not sure I understand the whole thing, but I'll pull out certain parts of it and kind of break it open. And then I go from that to, I start with Pied Beauty, and then I go into As Kingfishers Catch Fire. And the Kingfishers Catch Fire is wonderful because it's a beautiful illustration of that inner scape that he was trying to paint with this poetry, of this notion of like the landscape of the interior. And, and I tell them in preparation for becoming Catholic, you are called to live Catholicity. You're not just called to come to the sacraments, come to the church. You were called as kingfishers catch fire, so dragons fly, draw flame, as tumbled over rims and roundy well stones ring, each tuck string. And I go off on this whole thing, and they're just staring at me like I'm a crazy person. But then the ending of it is each just man justices acts in. God, now my brain's all off. But he says, "For Christ plays in 10,000 places. Lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces." And that notion of, yes, nature proclaims the glory of God through just being itself. We proclaim the glory of God through our inner life of grace and how we interact with other people. We're able to let Christ dance within the limbs and the eyes and the actions and the words and the prayers and the thoughts. We're called to incarnate Christ. And then from that into the comfort of the resurrection, and you go through that last part where he says, "In a flash, at a trumpet crash, I will be what Christ is, for Christ once was what I am." And that notion, you're just like, oh my gosh. And then you go right into the sacraments, and they're like, this is what the sacraments are. They're not just rituals. They're life-transforming, God breaking into humanity on humanity's terms in order to overthrow our simple-mindedness. Like, God is bringing eternity into time. Like, what does this mean? And they become hungry for it, but there's a lot of blank stares for a while.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I've never been as adventurous as to try and go through Manley Hopkins in any kind of faith formation context with anyone. Although I think everything that I've ever spoken since I read him has been reminiscent of his language. I mean, you even heard it in my, I guess, in my wording. So yeah, kindred spirits there, man. That's awesome. I love it. So what I think in kind of last statements, one of the things that I like to sort of do is bring things down to a little more practical. You're a fantastic podcaster, fantastic interviewer, and fantastic communicator. And obviously you've cultivated those skills within you through actually honing the trade of podcasting and of communicating. For people who would like to be able to speak with as much clarity and enthusiasm and to minister with as much kind of power, or even to be able to interview better, what are some of the things that you've done in your life, practices, ways that you do your life that make you able to do that better, that they can take and adapt into their lives?
One, you need to watch comedians. Watch as many comedians as you can. Watch the short stuff, the improv stuff, the long hour-long shows. The reason why is because comedians are masters of reading and responding to their audiences. Comedians perform series of bits that they have assembled and put together in a precise order that they think will elicit the most laughs. And if it goes nowhere, you can see in their minds they're working it out, analyzing the audience, shrugging it off, and then going to the next bit, or trying to work it out to where it would make, be funnier or take a different avenue. Comedians, for most of my early life, I spent listening to Scott Hahn tapes and watching Comedy Central. I mean, like, literally, those are my most formative stuff. Not to say that I'm funny, but to say that, like, so when I'm speaking, I am constantly identifying the most skeptical, the most checked out, the most exhausted, and I file where they are in the room, and I constantly circle back to their faces to see if I've won them. And if I've said a joke that has the skeptical person has responded with a smile, I will stay on that subject. So that brings me to point number 2. You have to study what the church teaches, what you're going to present on, whatever it is. You have to know it inside and out. Because if you need to linger more on the hypostatic union more than you need to linger on something else, and guy in the back is kind of checking out, you need to find a way to bring him in or her in. And once you have them in there, you need to build the rest of it. I mean, I will literally change the entire content of a class because I know the most skeptical person in the room has finally, like, the light went on. And so I will take in a totally new tangent. So if you don't know your stuff, I tell this people at Franciscan all the time. Like, I'm going to become a catechetics major because I want to teach high school students. I was like, great, you should be a theology major because they're going to come at you with complicated hypotheticals all the time. If you don't know it, you got to know the stuff so backwards and forwards that you got to be able to speak just like a human being instead of, well, the catechism says, because people don't care about authority. So there's that. And then lastly, you have to, and this is really hard, you have to listen to yourself. You have to record yourself and listen to yourself. One of the hardest things being a podcaster is me, because I do all the editing. I have to listen to myself. It drives me insane. Not only once you get past your own voice, you're like, why would you say that, you idiot? You idiot! And you just go off on all these different things. So when I give talks, I listen to them, especially if it's on a new subject. And when I do podcast episodes, I listen to it because if you're not listening to yourself, you're not critiquing yourself, then you're not going to grow because you just think you're fine. Or you're going to let your fears hem you into mediocrity. So,
Oh man, I can't even echo enough how uncomfortable it is to start podcasting and then listening to yourself. We started this podcast actually because Edmund Mitchell was like, guys, we need to start a Catholic Creatives podcast. And then he interviewed me once, and then I've been doing all the interviews ever since. So when I first did, yeah, I know, it passed the buck for sure. But he had obviously done podcasts before and was like kind of comfortable with it. Super unfamiliar to me. Done youth ministry a lot, so I've spoken. I'm comfortable talking, but like the process of doing a public interview where it's like we know we're talking to other people, but we're also trying to just have a normal conversation, and I'm trying to ask questions that are going to be like create value for other people. Like it is an art form, and I suck at it. I'm so bad, and like not just that, but like hearing myself asking questions and then like the way I laugh when people respond, or one of the big tics that I've noticed that I do is like I never ask a question like and then stop. I ask like 3 questions in one every time. For some reason I can't like just get myself to focus. All of that self-awareness that it introduced in me as I was listening to these podcasts was just like, oh my gosh, I am so not nearly as cool as I thought I was in my brain as I was walking around before this, which is so good. It's just so good. So, yeah, I can't echo that.
You got to be humble if you're going to grow. You got to be humble if you're going to grow. Pride prevents you from hearing criticism. Your interview with David from Life Team, he nailed that point so well when he talked about his own pride prevents you from growing. But it also prevents us from, like, even that, either we're hypercritical on ourselves, so again, it's not in reality, or we aren't critical at all of ourselves, so it's in unreality. We just need to be real. Yeah.
And I think, too, like, just believing that we can get better, so strange, I think, in our culture. It's like, the culture just says, oh, if you're not good at that, like, that's just not your thing. Like, it's not your personality, so that's for other people. And I think just believing one that we can grow in ways that are not our like base like comfort level thing is actually a really important part of that whole dynamic of like honing a craft. So yeah, thank you so much, man, for coming on the show and for like kind of sharing your wisdom about I guess about communication, about like evangelization, and just some of your own story in learning that. It's like really awesome. So where can people find you if they want to check out more and hear more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so the main two places where you can find my stuff, and I'm always looking to hawk my own stuff, but Catching Foxes is a weekly podcast. We air new episodes every Friday morning, somewhere between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., whenever I get it edited. Again, that goes back to the no sleep thing. Catching Foxes, it's explicit, so don't listen to it while you're in car line with your kids. It's explicit. And then the other thing is layevangelist.com. That's kind of like the home base for everything. The Catching Foxes you can find on iTunes as a podcast.
Cool.
And then that's it. That's me.
That's awesome. Can you say a little bit about what those things are and why you're doing them, what makes them different or interesting, and why anyone would want to go listen to them?
Yeah, so Catching Foxes, the goal is to have a ongoing conversation between me and my co-host Luke. We both are actively involved in ministry. He's not allowed by his HR department to say either his last name or his job, and my pastor don't care. So it's a discussion, not instruction. At least that's what we try to do. It's so hard for me as a teacher and preacher to not just jump into instruction. But the idea is take a topic and talk about it as a discussion, and to be as honest as we can about it. You know, what's going on in our lives, what are our genuine thoughts. We just did a 2-parter on the election, or the second half was on the election, which is a kind of a dumpster fire. And then the other thing, layevangelist.com, where you can actually find that podcast too. Lay Evangelist is a blog / my business card on the web kind of thing. But what I want it to be is for people who want to learn more about how to do the new evangelization. I have articles written. The early articles, it's one of those funny things where it's like I hate all my early stuff. But I don't update it a ton. But I also have a SoundCloud account where I post I have 101, 102 talks that I've given. And I just record them, edit them, and dump them onto SoundCloud. And it's on that website. You can get to it through that website, right on the homepage. So it's just my whole goal is to help people give talks, hear messages. How do I preach the gospel? What does it mean for a Catholic to preach the gospel? It's all right there. So it's a learning. We're laughing, we're learning, we're hugging each other online. It's a beautiful thing.
That is beautiful. Well, yeah, thank you so much. Do you have any last parting words of anything that you want to say to the community or the creatives that are in the group before we sign off?
Yes, I want to say this. Do not isolate yourselves. The greatest tool of the devil is to isolate yourself, is to cut yourself off, whether you're in an office building and you wall yourself in your office or at your cube or your desk or whatever. You and I cannot be Christians on our own. We need the community, and we need the human mirrors to show us our perfections and imperfections and all that stuff. So the best thing you can do as a human being who loves our Lord is to be in community with other people. And that means inconveniencing yourself so that other people can be in communion with you. It means giving up good entertainment for better friendships. So once a week, commit to inviting people over for a glass of wine or beer and a conversation and prayer, whatever it is. They don't just invite people over your house, inconvenience yourself to make life easier easier for community. Because I find that the more millennials, the young adults, all these people, the more we get into our craft of working on talks, building websites, creating these designs, we're just surrounded by technology in our dedicated space. And I'm not even talking about sharing your art. I mean sharing your life with people around you. And by letting people into your home, not just at the parish, but letting people into your home, you are allowing yourself to be rooted in the community, in the local area. We need that more than anything else. So please, for the love of Christ, the best way to evangelize and to grow as a human person is the same thing, which is community. That's all I got.
That I cannot think of a better way of signing out than that, man. That is a good word, as they say.
As they say.
As they say. So thank you so much for coming on. We really love your perspective, and love your heart for ministry, man. It's so refreshing. So thank you so much for what you're doing and for taking the time.
You're welcome, and I love your heart too.
Thanks, man. That's really kind of you. That's kind of you.
You're welcome. I'm a nice guy. It's what I do.
All right, man. Well, we'll see you in the group, man. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
Bye.